One of the more fascinating things that we all have to deal with is working with people that are disagreeable. And often you see this a lot within academia, you see this a lot in all areas of our lives, but it's something that we have to contend with. And, to give you an example, I am an engineer and I sort of look for, okay, what are the parameters in which we can all get along and what is the best possible way to sort of move forward. And often people are at different parts of their life and they don't want to move along. And you will see that where there will be challenges that you would sort of say, hey, this is the best possible course of action right here. And it's clearly laid out that this is the best possible course of action. But for whatever reason, some people just don't want to agree. And they look at this and they say, well, that is not what I think. And despite the fact that it's laid out and there's sort of a best possible course of action that seems completely reasonable, you have to figure out how to deal with that when there are people that just don't want to agree or don't want to sort of see the world in the way that there is this best possible course of action. This is one of the harder management problems that most people have to deal with in their lives. And it's managing everybody around them despite the fact that they might not see the same world as you. And now, why is it that they might not see the same world as you? They have different personalities. They come at the world completely differently. And so you might be very rationally minded. As myself, I'm an engineer. I sort of are rationally minded, but a lot of people aren't, right? They don't see the world in that kind of way. Sometimes, and I talk about a lot about meaning on this channel, well, on the opposite side of meaning, where there's sort of a positive thing that happens, that means you're doing things despite the sort of rationality of it. And you are passionate about this thing despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily make any sense to everybody else. Now, on the flip side, if it sort of makes sense and this is kind of the rational way of doing things, then it's very likely that you will do things that simply don't make sense to other people, despite the fact that it's well laid out. We've seen this very much so in major events that happen. I'm not going to name them because they're politically oriented, but many events that have happened over major events where you see lots of people sort of disagree, despite the fact that there is this one way of doing things. Now, one way that sort of seems like it would be the easiest and most effective and all that kind of stuff, and yet you simply have to recognize that everybody is going to see that. So how do you deal with this? This problem is very well versed if you're a judge, if you are a physician, for example, where you would say this is the best possible course of action. And if you are that physician, you know what the best possible course of action is. Or if you're a judge, you sort of see that there's this evidence here, and we have to come out on the other side of being happy and healthy about myself. That's more what I'm more concerned about, is you as a person that's sort of dealing with this, the sort of quote unquote irrationality of it. So first of all, it's recognizing the fact that not everybody is going to come to terms with that there is rationality. So it doesn't matter how much convincing that you try to do. It does not matter the evidence that is shown. It doesn't matter statistics. It doesn't matter if you sort of look at legitimacy and you default to larger institutions and all these kind of things where you're sort of trying to convince and tell other people, like, look at this is the way that things are set up. It's not going to work. It's just simply not going to work. The only thing that you can do is to get out of the convincing game and start working on the boundaries that you have in your life, where you say, this is the way that I think that the world actually is, and we see it here, and this is it. You just say it simply just once, and you'll realize that repeatedly you will deal with this a lot, right? Like some people have personalities that are highly narcissistic, for example. Um, and you will have to deal with that sort of nature of, and it's just inward looking, right? There's nothing wrong with it. We all have different personalities, right? I'm probably, to some degree, I probably have some narcissistic, we all have these kind of personality traits, right? I have some narcissistic traits, but I'm probably more on the, looking outwards, more on the empathetic side, a more emotional side. And it's taken me years to figure this out. So if this is you and you're dealing with this, right, it doesn't matter how much that you actually say. The only thing that you could do, and the response often why people do these kind of things, right, is because they are dealing with things like fear or judgment or whatever. It hurts them physically inside to sort of see the world in a different way than what they're currently seeing it at. It really, really does hurt them, right? And you have to come to terms with that is probably not likely going to change. And so what do? You create these boundaries around you where you simply just say, this is the way it is. And then after that, and this is the super hard part that we all have to deal with, is to drop it, right? And I have a tendency to ruminate and to think about things, but then, you tell your truth and then you move on. And then you realize, like, it's not going to change. And so you have to tell your truth and try to move forward from there. You just simply say, this is the way it is, and then you move on. And as much as you want to ruminate and convince and do all these kind of things, it's not going to matter. So the more that you pull back from that, you say, this is the way it is, just as if you're like a judge, for example, right? There's a lot of people, if you go to, some folks, many of them will say, I didn't do it. And many of them will say that this wasn't me. But we know often it is the case, right? That they did do it. And the judge knows that. And so what do? You simply state your case and then you move on. You drop it and you move on. You realize, like, hey, you know what? A lot of people are not nice. A lot of people are not well-intentioned. A lot of people just can't see the world in a certain way because of the way that they're raised and all of these kind of things. They're not going to see the same sort of rational path, or they don't want to even cooperate together, right? Like, that is the reality of the world that we live in. And this is a challenging thing because in my house, in my home, how I grew up, we kind of tried to work together. And that was a default assumption that we had, is to work together. But many places and many homes, many people that you interact with, that wasn't their default. Their default was to undermine or to hurt other people, or, that they were part of a family where there was somebody that was very, controlling or didn't acknowledge emotions and all of those things that are normal, healthy things. There's something that just wasn't part of it. And so they don't know how to cooperate. And they may never know how to cooperate because that's how they were raised, or even it was just they're born into it. That is their emotion set. That's their endowments that they have when they're born into this world. So rather than convincing, the best thing you could do is say, this is what the evidence is, and move on. And as you move on, you're acknowledging, and you realize, like, deep down inside, it's this idea of just acceptance, right? Just accepting people for as they are, and realizing that they may never get to that point that you're thinking about, and that's okay. That's on them. It's not on you. And that's where you got to take a step back and say, I'm going to try to do the best that I possibly can, state my case, do my thing, and I'm going to try to move forward from there. Now, the other thing that you can do is come into the situation. This is something that was taught to me by a dear friend, advisor. And this was taught to me as realizing that there's these different layers of um, emotion or sort of truths, right? One of them is that sort of rational sense that this is the right answer, and you know it's the right answer, right? Like everybody knows it's the right answer. But then you have to look into how do we give people an outlet so that they feel good about themselves and approaches things so that they feel good about themselves. And so you're arriving upon that truth so that they feel good and they have an outlet and they're not going to feel trapped in any sort of way. And so that they can get there to that truth, whatever that is. That's that's very hard to learn. I'm still struggling to learn it every day. But I'm learning also on the same time is to say my truth, realizing that not everybody's going to like it. You're going to get eye rolls. You're going to get all those kind of negative emotions where it actually hurts the other people, but then you just move on. Stop and you just move on. Try to live the best possible life that you can live given with what you actually have. And so it requires you to detach. It requires you to let go. It requires you to create imaginary boundaries in your mind where you say, well, this is the way that things are, and that's it. And you walk your healthy, perfectly fine life going forward. Super hard to do, I realize it, but it takes practice. And keep in mind that not everybody is well-intentioned. Keep in mind that there's many people in this world that are going to do things that just do not make rational sense. There is nothing behind it that has, you can't do any convincing numbers, anything like that, defaulting to this is what, an institution says. Any of that stuff does not work. And so you got to move away from that and think about, why is it that people have that stuff? Why do they feel like that? And then move from there to say, this is the way it is, and we're going to keep moving forward. And I'm happy with this kind of life. All right, take care, and have a wonderful day. Bye.